Hi, Jean Schnupp here. Welcome to another of the new Savvy Sightseer video vacation series. Today we are off to Paris and northwest France. It's a little hard to describe France. No one word will do it. The country has many facets to its personality. Here we will see heroic battlefields, iconic structures, striking views, not to mention palaces and cathedrals for all tastes. In 2019, France was among the top 5 visited countries by Americans. One survey even has it as being the number one destination. There is so much to see in this country that I've narrowed down our travel today to the historic and picturesque northern region. For a look at the part of France that most inspired artists and writers alike, the exotic south of France, make sure you check out my phenomenal Provence program. We'll start in the country's capital, Paris. Known both as the City of Light and the City of Love, there is a fascination to this town. We'll look at some of its landmarks and the stories behind them, including the ever-resilient Notre Dame Cathedral, that is before the tragic fire hit it in April of 2019. We'll visit the fabulous Palace of Versailles' little-known enclave of Marie Antoinette, her secluded hamlet. Then we'll head northwest to Normandy and the historic American cemetery and its moving tributes to our soldiers. We'll also journey to an island cathedral with an unusual second purpose before sweeping into the lavish Loire Valley for its splendid chateau and Leonardo da Vinci's surprising stash. Come, let's go to this fascinating and very beautiful country. I thought a great way to see some of Paris's iconic sights without the hustle and bustle and traffic and sightseers would be from the River Seine, which bisects the city. The river cruise took me first past this building, the Musee D'orsay, which in 1978 was classified as an historical monument. It was once a railway station built to handle tourists for the 1900 World's Fair. Eventually, its platforms proved too short for modern trains, and in 1986 it was reopened as a world-class museum featuring all types of art from the second half of the 19th century. Instead of such classic sights, I found I was drawn more to items on the river itself. Over 30 pedestrian and/or transit bridges, or ponts, P-O-N-T-S, span the historic waterway. Each one is unique and deserves a tourist's attention, like the Pont de Sachem, built in 1902. The design for a two-tiered bridge, the lower level for cars and pedestrians, the upper for trains, came out of a competition to replace an old metal footbridge. It epitomizes modern times and industry with several large iron sculptures and statues. This group represents the boatmen. On the other side of the bridge are ironsmith riveters. The central arch has 4 huge statues. One set represents electricity and commerce. The other set is science and labor, designed by Jules Felix Coutin, who created the model for the transportation group in our own Grand Central Terminal. I think this is the most exquisite of the Seine bridges, Pont Alexander III. The unique gleaming white and gold span is lined with elaborate ironwork lamps. On each end, 55-foot-tall pillars are topped with gilded winged horses. It is named for Russian Tsar Alexander III and was built to commemorate the French-Russian alliance of 1891. Until recently, the Pont des Arts was the destination bridge for lovers, who cemented their love by clasping a lock etched with their initials on the bridge's railings. The ritual became so popular it endangered the pedestrian bridge and was stopped by French officials in 2015. They removed the railings and 45 tons of locks. Officials tried to keep the love by substituting artistic sculptures and nicknaming it the Enchanted Bridge. The correlation may be lost, though, when viewing the replacement artwork. Large steel trees and bronze sculptures of human beings who, according to the artist, are struggling and twisting in moments of extreme pain and joy. Not exactly the same sentiment as the lover's locks idea. Just beyond the Pont des Arts is one of Paris's better-known bridges, the Pont Neuf. Although its name translates to the New Bridge, it is now the oldest remaining of the river's spans, opened back in 1607. Like nearby Notre Dame, this bridge is peppered with gargoyles, over 380 of them. Paris has lots of lucky charms. The star-shaped marker Point Zero in front of Notre Dame, is the historic and geographic center of Paris. From here, all distances in France are measured. It's also a talisman for luck and love. Spinning or even just touching the marker with a hope in your heart or a sweetheart in hand is believed to ensure lifelong love or at least a guarantee to return to Paris. The passer through walls in the upper left corner of the screen is the title character of a story by French novelist and children's writer Marcel Aimé about a man who discovers he can walk through walls. His shiny hand is the result of passers-by repeatedly rubbing it for luck. Or perhaps they're grabbing it to help him through, or maybe they're hoping he'll pull them through to someplace else. Over in the business district, you can find a giant thumb. This was made in 1965. It stands 40 feet tall and weighs in at about 18 tons. The French sculptor took a mold of his own thumb and created several absurdly enlarged versions of it. It's considered an international gesture of good luck. In other words, a thumbs up, which is now visited by thousands of people each year. I guess art is in the eye of the beholder. At Place de l'Ama, on the right bank of the Seine, is a memorial doing double duty. Here, the Flame of Liberty, a full-size replica of the New York City's Statue of Liberty's flame, has saluted French-American friendship since 1989. But along the way, it took on an all-new identity and became a memorial to the late Lady Diana, Princess of Wales. The flame marks the spot where, in the road tunnel below the square, the popular British royal died in a 1997 car accident. Tributes and photos decorate the base of the memorial, keeping alive the memory of the so-called People's Princess. The Arc de Triomphe was commissioned in commemoration of a successful battle and today houses the tomb of the unknown soldier from World War I. In 1806, France's Emperor Napoleon I wanted to honor his army's triumphs and domination of most of Europe by giving them a grand stand of columns through which to march when returning to Paris. Ironically, he never had the opportunity to march through it. Instead, he was carried through it in 1821 when his funeral procession crossed under the partially finished monument on its way to his final resting place at the city's Hôtel des Invalides. New York City's Washington Square Arch was modeled after it in 1892 by Stanford White. The eternal flame that has burned here since November 11, 1923, inspired Jackie Kennedy to require one for President Kennedy's grave in Arlington 40 years later. From the Arc de Triomphe, we travel down a grand boulevard, the Champs-Élysées, to the site of one of the bloodiest clashes on French land. Not between France and its enemies, but one that pitted French against French. At the once named Place de Révolution, about 1,200 French lost their heads to the newly designed death penalty machine, the guillotine. This was at the height of the French Revolution in the late 1790s. Paris's largest public square was reportedly so soaked in the stench of blood at the time that a herd of cattle refused to cross it. In the square's center, now renamed the Place de la Concorde to represent hope for a better future, stands an 80-foot tall obelisk, a gift in 1829 from Egypt. At 3,300 years old, this is the oldest monument in Paris. It was one of a pair that stood by the Luxor Temple in Egypt. And of course, there's the Eiffel Tower, a staple of Paris's skyline that was never meant to be a permanent structure. It was built as a grand gateway to the 1889 World's Fair and as a salute to the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. The intent had been to tear it down after, say, 20 years, but artists, writers, and residents wanted its demise much sooner, referring to it as a growing ink spot, the hateful shadow of the hateful column of bolted iron. Engineer Gustave Eiffel fought back by making the tower indispensable as a strategic science and communications center. Today, over 100 antennas top the 1,063-foot tower, which is also used for physics experiments, communication signaling, and electric light and wind studies. The 10,000-pound Grand Iron Lady has become the most visited, fee-paying monument in the world, averaging about 7 million sightseers a year. The very outline of the tower has become synonymous with France. There are an estimated 40,000 churches in France, but the queen of them all is undoubtedly Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral. It took 200 years to build. It was started as a labor of love by a local bishop. He felt Paris was too grand a city for just any old church and set about constructing a cathedral worthy of it on the site of a Roman temple to Jupiter. Completed in 1345, Notre Dame is an architectural wonderland. Its massive south tower bell has a name, Emmanuel, and weighs in at about 28,000 pounds. Unfortunately, the Grand Lady is in need of a facelift after a horrific fire in April 2019. In a stroke of really good luck, the processions of apostles, 3 on each side of the tower, had been taken down for restoration only the week before the fire, so all these copper sculptures remain intact. For me, the most painful scene to watch during the fire was the spire as it slowly became engulfed and toppled over. The famous West Rose window above the main western entrance is 33 feet in diameter and still has its original 13th century glass. When Notre Dame is mentioned, usually it's only the entryway rose window discussed, but there's actually 3 of these artistic masterpieces. The other 2 are even bigger and grander at 42 feet in diameter. The south rose window, constructed in 1260, has stunning stained glass work, as does the north rose window, which dates from 1250. I had taken this standing under the tower between the 2 windows. It's mind-boggling to me how that tower came down, yet the 2 massive rose windows remained intact during the fire. This gives you a sense of the magnitude of this cathedral, which is bigger than a football field. 425 feet across, 157 feet wide, 114 feet tall. It's one of the largest religious buildings in the world. It's also one of the most visited. 13 million typically flock to see it each year. Its estimated capacity had been about 9,000 people. A reported 52 acres of trees were cut down in the 12th century to create the roof. Each beam consisted of 1 individual tree, so it is believed it can't be replicated, since we no longer have trees of that scale. A glass roof of similar proportions is under consideration for its replacement. Also surviving the devastation of April 2019 is the superb altar and cross. The flame-retardant wood cross covered with gold leaf was a relatively recent addition in 1994. Without any embedded illumination, firefighters were surprised that it appeared to glow through the smoke. "It's very curious," the artist said. "She simply did her duty. She shone in the night and in the chaos." Another Parisian landmark bathed in gold is Versailles, not just another royal residence of French kings in the 17th and 18th century. It was pretty much a city on its own, with tens of thousands of residents. King Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, made a pet project of turning his royal hunting lodge into one of Europe's largest complexes, an astounding one-of-a-kind cultural and political center of France. The entire estate comprises some 30,000 acres and took thousands of workers over 50 years to develop, at a cost estimated in today's value of about $2 billion US. But cost was never an issue. Louis simply opened the country's treasury to fund the project. Statistics demonstrate the estate's excesses: 700 rooms, 67 staircases, over 2,000 windows. There's 2,000 sculptures around the buildings and grounds, and gold or gold leaf is in ample supply. The main entry gate had 100,000 gold leaves. So looking at all that gold, is no wonder a revolution was started by starving peasants. About 7 million visitors tour Versailles annually, an easy day trip from Paris, which is only about 12 miles away. My reaction walking from room to room was that every square inch from floor to ceiling was covered in some kind of art. In the Abundance Salon, this ceiling art features images symbolizing the king's power. The scepter for his rule, overflowing gold coins underscore his wealth, and angels signify his divine right, the right that is supposedly given to a king or a queen by God to rule a country. And that right is hereditary. It stays in one bloodline. One of the most famous rooms is the Hall of Mirrors, where in 1919 the Treaty of Versailles, ending World War I, was signed. The hall is indeed the visual jewel of the chateau. The 30-section ceiling arch illustrates the glorious history of Louis XIV, his military and diplomatic victories, as well as reforms he instituted in the kingdom. There are 357 mirrors that surround 17 arches and are opposite 17 windows. The sun pours in, bouncing off 24 gilded candelabra that held thousands of candles. American author Mark Twain visited the estate in 1869 and said, "Your brain grows giddy, stupefied by the world of beauty around you." That was Louis's goal, to demonstrate the Sun King's power and influence as a divine ruler, intimidating peasants as well as anyone who did business with him at the palace. This showcase fountain depicts Apollo, the sun god of Roman myth, with a face strangely resembling Louis XIV. It rises dramatically out of the waters on his daily journey to transport the sun across the sky. Louis XIV was nothing if not subtle. Versailles' French-style formal gardens took 40 years to complete. Louis XIV valued them as much as the palace. The strong geometric patterns symbolized the king's power and authority, the ability to bend nature to man's will. The Sun King wanted them to magnify the glory of his palace at Versailles, which was itself a monument to its absolute rule. The 250 acres of gardens include 200,000 trees, hundreds of fountainheads, and about 210,000 flowers that are still planted every year. No surprise, then, that Versailles tops the list of National Geographic's top 10 gardens in the world. Young Marie Antoinette, who was used to a more down-to-earth lifestyle in her mother's Austrian court, found Versailles life just a little too hectic and demanding. She developed a retreat on the estate about a mile from the main palace and turned it into a little fantasy world of escape called the Petit Trianon. An extensive, renowned botanical gardens and greenhouses were ripped out and the land remodeled after an English garden. Marie Antoinette said, "Here I am no longer queen, I am me." Hundreds of gardeners worked on the transformation for about 7 years, building hills and creating streams for a pastoral rustic garden. In 1783, an English hamlet complete with 12 buildings, a watermill, and a dairy farm were added over a 3-year period. The Marlborough Tower overlooks the big man-made lake on which they had boat rides and fishing outings. The tower's upper portion was used as an observatory and also to communicate with the Palace of Versailles via signals. Such was life before cell phones. A farm was located outside the village and sheltered various livestock. Marie was said to have dressed as a milkmaid to live out parts of her fantasy. On the coast of Normandy, northwest of Paris, is a somber sight, the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer. This is an extremely respectful place with neatly lined stark white crosses and stars of David, over 9,000 in all. And there's another 1,600 commemorations on the walls of the missing. There's something about seeing the American flag flying alone so majestically on basically foreign soil. It is one thing to read about this place in your history books. It is quite another to stand and look down on where the Allies actually landed from the viewpoint of the German army's stronghold. The overwhelming odds against a successful incursion on French soil by Allied forces is driven home by the mere act of standing on this hill, looking down at what is known as Omaha Beach, where American soldiers stormed ashore on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Thousands of Americans died during the initial onslaught alone. They had to avoid underwater obstacles, then get through the beach that was mined and covered with impediments, such as wooden stakes, metal tripods, and barbed wire, all while dodging a hail of gunfire from up here. Overlooking the gravestones is a soaring 22-foot-tall bronze statue called the Spirit of American Youth Rising from the Waves. The stones set in the memorial area floor are from Omaha Beach, and written above is, "This embattled shore, portal of freedom, is forever hallowed by the ideals, the value, and the sacrifices of our fellow countrymen. This overview shows the enormity of the undertaking, dubbed Operation Overlord, that would become the largest amphibious campaign in military history. Each of the 5 landing spots were codenamed. Omaha and Utah to its west were taken by the Americans, Gold and Sword by the Brits, and Juneau by the Canadians. The cemetery's visitor center pays a fitting and very moving tribute to all who participated in Operation Overlord. It dramatically puts into perspective the challenges faced by these very young soldiers. There were 500,000 beach obstacles and 6.5 million mines that were part of what made the Atlantic coast of France one of the most heavily fortified places on Earth. The center tells these soldiers' stories using their own words and images. A helmet stuffed with pictures and a letter from home reminds visitors of the very human face of war. While visiting something so solemn is not usually on a vacation to see list, you feel compelled, if in Normandy, to do so. And when you see this statement, you understand why. Think not only upon their passing, remember the glory of their spirit. Not all sites in the area are war-related. The French Cathedral, Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, on the border with Brittany, has one of the most recognizable silhouettes in the world. After reportedly being visited by Michael the Archangel in the 8th century, a local bishop built an abbey on the very top of a rocky island in the bay. It became a pilgrimage site, repeatedly expanded to accommodate the ever-increasing number of religious devotees. After doing an unlikely stint as a prison during the French Revolution, they'd housed up to 14,000 inmates here. The abbey is again a working monastery, welcoming visiting pilgrims. Millions of tourists also flock to the site to admire its unique look, which earned it a place on UNESCO's World Heritage Sites in 1979 for its exceptional combination of natural and cultural elements. Not all visitors, though, including myself, follow the devoted religious and make the arduous trip all the way to the top of the abbey, which is 264 feet up, taking 900 steps. Mont Saint-Michel's most unusual feature is how it can quickly become disconnected from the mainland when its connecting mudflats disappear and it reverts to island status thanks to the highest spring tides in continental Europe. Author Victor Hugo described the tide rushing as swiftly as a galloping horse. The water level can mushroom to 45 feet, gushing in at 200 feet per second. Early pilgrims walking the mudflats were caught unaware and some lost their lives. Later, drivers who didn't pay attention to the tidal times returned to find their cars immersed. Finally, in 2015, cars were banned and a bridge opened to safely transport guests from a mainland parking lot to the mall. Much safer all around. I was on the tram when the tide came in. It was indeed galloping. In 2015, a solar eclipse brought in even higher tides, a whopping 46 feet high, over 18 feet above normal. The next time it will go that high is in 2033. I've saved arguably the best for last. That's the Loire Valley. When royals needed a break from daily routines and backbiting politics, they flocked to their country homes. Elaborate chateaux along scenic Loire Valley and its river cutting east to west across central France. They outdid each other with enchanting castles, carefully designed grounds, and lavish interiors. In 2000, UNESCO made a nearly 180-mile stretch of the valley with over 40 chateaux, part of its World Heritage Sites. This is my favorite, the Chateau De Cheninso, dubbed the Chateau of the Ladies, in salute to the influence of its formidable women owners through the centuries. It is one of the finest of the valley's castles and exemplifies sumptuous tastes of the rich, intertwined with historical events and lots of melodrama. Each owner built on the original modest 15th century fairy tale castle until you have the stunner that we see today. Its main saga starts in the mid-1500s when King Henry II gave the property to his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. She put a decidedly female stamp on it and extended a bridge from the main building across the River Cher, giving the chateau a unique look. She also laid out gardens considered to be the most spectacular and modern of the time. Her reign as both mistress of the king and the chateau, ended suddenly with the king's death and her subsequent eviction by the cuckolded queen, the powerful Catherine de' Medici. The palace became the seat of power for de' Medici when she ruled France as regent on behalf of her young son, Francis II. All rooms are fully furnished. Fresh flowers grown on the property or on the tables and the mantels throughout the house, giving the chateau a welcoming feeling, not at all like a museum. This is the Five Queens bedroom, named in memory of de' Medici's 2 daughters and 3 daughters-in-law. This is the cheery little bedroom of Louise. She retired to Cheninso to mourn the death of her husband, King Henry III, who was assassinated in 1589. Ironically, while her room was decorated in black, with objects of mourning like silver tears and gravediggers' shovels, she was required to dress in all white. That was the protocol for royal mourning, so she was dubbed the White Queen. De' Medici took de Poitiers Bridge addition a step further and built on it a 200-foot-long gallery. Inside is a magnificent ballroom with checkerboard marble floor. This became the hotspot for entertainment. When her son, Francis II, married Mary, Queen of Scots in 1560, de' Medici hosted the event at the chateau. The Meunier family, prominent chocolatiers, bought the chateau in 1913. During World War I, they turned it into a hospital and treated thousands of French soldiers. Carrying on the tradition of strong women who left their imprint on Cheninso, Simone Meunier took advantage of a strange set of circumstances during World War II. Bizarrely, the River Cher, which ran under the bridge and the ballroom, constituted the line of demarcation. That's the wartime boundary between free and occupied France. The south side of the castle sat in unoccupied France, while land on the north side was held by the Nazis. Simone helped the resistance smuggle escapees through the gallery's south entrance. Cheninso is second only to Versailles as the most visited home in France. At nearby Amboise is a house that gets overlooked by many who rush instead to see the remains of a royal palace. But this should be a must-see for anyone going there. 2019 commemorated 500 years since the great artist Leonardo da Vinci died at this home, Chateau De. He had moved from Italy to France as a guest of King Francis I. Da Vinci is buried in the Royal Chateau's chapel, which can be reached from here by an underground passageway. Clos-Lucé provides a unique glimpse into the Renaissance man's life and thoughts. His living quarters are beautifully furnished, from his lush 4-poster bed to a roomy kitchen. But the best sights are found in the basement. Visitors can learn about the multi-talented, multi-fascinated dimensions of this man. He is identified most often with his art, the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper, but he was much more. A mathematician, civil and military engineer, architect, town planner, anatomist, painter. He was skilled in optics, hydraulics, and aeronautics. You can see aspects of this in the 40 scale models of some of his many inventions, including an automobile prototype, bicycle, a triple-tier machine gun. There's a parachute, an immovable armored tank with 4 wheels, guns all around, and an observation turret. There's also a paddle boat and a swing bridge. Then there's the air screw, a device designed to compress air to obtain flight, similar to today's helicopters. Outside, you can see his inventions full size, such as a double-decker bridge, a foreshadow of today's Verrazano Narrows Bridge. In 2016, a truly spectacular renovation was made to the home, and by sheer luck, I was able to get a preview before its grand opening the following week. Walking through a door, I was greeted by the great man himself. An amazingly lifelike hologram of Da Vinci chatting with a contemporary just a few feet away is a bit jarring at first, but what a fantastic addition to the experience of visiting not just his home, but the Renaissance man himself. The exhibit's opening was timed to celebrate 500 years since he'd moved to France. He is looking at the Mona Lisa, one of the few paintings he brought with him when he moved, which explains why it's in the Louvre in Paris, France, and not in Italy. I hope you've enjoyed this trip to France, and I like to end all of my programs with the words of Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you don't appreciate the moment until it becomes a memory. And I like to add to that to always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. To see more of France or any of my other European destinations, go to my website. If you have any questions about this program, email me or use the contact page on my website. When libraries are again offering programs, you can check my programs tab to see where I'll be. Until then, visit the library site for more video vacations by Savvy Sightseer. Stay healthy, stay home. Au revoir.